Okay, Jacqueline D'Agostino, and Tony Rosario, and Jean DeRusso, Dawn Falco, and Aaron-Watkins Lopez. It's all through, and I'll leave that to your discretion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Michael Setzer.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members, council. Thank you for being here. We've got a number of topics to cover today at our quarterly meeting. So here's a quick agenda. We want to touch on the second quarter scorecard. That will be the scorecard for April, May, June. We're just at the end of the third quarter now, so that's not finished yet. We also want to touch on a requirement of our contract, which is to establish some benchmarks and to associate damages and incentives with achievement or failure against those benchmarks. We're going to propose something that none of these things require action on the part of the committee, but they will in the future. So these are introducing things that you may need to act on in the future. We also want to prepare you a little bit for the 2016 budget, even though the formal process is still several months away. And then just a couple of status reports on new vehicles on order and on the technology project that we speak about typically at this meeting. So with that, I'll just jump in, but please interrupt me at any point if you have questions or comments. And I highlighted a couple things that that I think you might be interested in. Along the top line there, hours operated. So I've highlighted second quarter from last year and the second quarter from this year. And what you see is that there's a decline in the number of hours operated. And what that reflects is one fewer weekdays in the second quarter of this year than last year, just because of the way the calendar fell and when weekends and weekdays fell. So you're going to see that little difference reflected in a number of the other statistics. If you look at the two lines down, total passenger trips, we carried 7,296 last year and 6,966, and that's a reflection of the difference in the number of weekdays, and we carry a lot more passengers than weekends. Operating cost, you see, was also reflected that fewer number of weekdays, but you see that fare revenue went up the second quarter this year over second quarter of last year. That is primarily a reflection of the fare increase that took place at the beginning of the second quarter of this year. The MetroCard fares, as you recall, went from $250 to $275, though cash fare stayed at $250. So the combination of those things, the lower operating cost and higher fare revenue, comes together in the cost recovery line about halfway down the page. 43 cost recovery is a ratio of operating costs to, it's the ratio of fares collected, operating revenue collected to operating costs. So in the second quarter of last year, 43% of the cost of providing transportation service was covered by passengers' fares. This year it's up to 45%. So in terms of efficiency, that's a measure we watch. The higher that number, the less we're asking of taxpayers and the more we're asking of riders. The bad news on this page is the last highlighted line, miles between breakdowns. You can see we had a terrible second quarter as far as the reliability of the fleet. That was a number of things that come together, including a continuously aging fleet, as well as some warm weather beginning in June, as well as some other factors. We've taken a number of steps, including some major personnel changes, to address that. We've begun to see, June was really when it bottomed out. We've begun to see it come up already, and we've added about 1,000 miles to that number and expect that you will see that number continue to go up. There's no way to make anything good out of that, but I think we ought to be completely transparent about it. Sometimes you may even hear later today, that we are having some significant bus reliability problems. Towards the end, we're going to talk about the new bus order, which will go a long way towards addressing that. On the able ride side, mostly all good news, no real issues there. Steady, pretty stable demand. We provided 94,204 able ride trips. Second quarter last year, 93,281 this year. Again, that's a reflection of the slight calendar difference. Calls answered ratio is one that you've asked about in the past, and you can see a steady improvement there. 89% of calls answered. That means of all the calls made, Some people abandon the call because they don't want to stay on hold. Obviously, the higher that number is, the better service we're giving. 68% a year ago, up to 89% this year. That's also a reflection of some equipment improvements that we've described to you in the past. Average hold time is way down, which is related to that, down to 1.48, 1 minute 48 seconds. We also have pretty good news on the preventable accidents per 100,000 miles. 1.12 per 100,000 miles a year ago, 1.04. It's the right direction. We'd still like to see that get better. And then lastly, on-time performance, pretty stable, pretty good, 87% last year, 85% this year. Well within expectations, I think, of just about anybody. You might remember, if you've been on the committee for a while, that there was a time when we were reporting much lower on-time performance in Able Ride. So this is very good news, and it's reflected in the complaints or the lack thereof from Able Ride customers. A very high level of satisfaction reported by Able Ride customers, and it's continuing to go up. It's actually 93% this quarter, so we're very pleased to report that one. That's those are the two scorecards that we submit to you quarterly. Let me stop here and see if there are questions or comments that any members of the committee would like to. Yes, sir.
Of course, I think the element I was concerned about was the breakdown between mileage.
Right.
So the only thing I would ask, or it's probably under review, but are we doing an analysis of these breakdowns to see if anything is consistent? For example, that the brake's not working properly, or is it transmissions, is it starters? Is there any pattern?
Yes.
That the buses are breaking down for specific reasons, and can we improve the maintenance aspects?
Absolutely, exactly right, and that's exactly the way we're approaching it now. Engines account for a very high number of the breakdowns, not engine failures, although a few of those, but engine lights coming on and some of the characteristics of engine operation that require us to stop the bus and either repair it or trade it out or things like that. So beginning to campaign engines. We're also doing some extensive training on brake work, although that doesn't account for a lot of breakdowns, but it does account for some. Pressure testing, the circulatory system of the bus also produces a number of, we're pressure testing to reduce the number of times we road call a bus because of a drop in coolant pressure or drop in oil pressure, those kinds of things. So we do know what the major causes are and are attacking them based on their frequency, and that's part of the reason it's starting to come up now. We're scheduling them in for repairs based on some of that data. But you're right. That's exactly the way to address this. Other questions, or shall I move on?
Committee members to Mr. Setzer, or please continue.
Okay. So part of our contract requires that we establish benchmarks for some key indicators. These are the 8 indicators that in the contract it says we'll establish benchmarks and the committee will approve them, and then we'll report against those benchmarks, and will be assessed damages, liquidated damages if we fall too far below, and be given an incentive payment if we rise far above these. So they are, since we haven't done it yet, we're proposing that 2016 is a logical time to begin using those. Here's an example. If fixed route on-time performance, which was identified as one of those 8 areas, let's say we set a benchmark at 70%, then that would mean that if we're 5% worse than that, if we're below 65%, then we owe you $5,000. And if we're 5% better than that, then we get an incentive of $5,000. Although the incentive that, if we have to pay you damages, that's cash. If we get the incentive, it's not cash. It's credits that we can use to pay off future assessments for falling short of the benchmark. So that's the way it works, and that's the way it's set out in the contract that was negotiated several years ago. Here's what we would propose as a place to get started. And what we'd like to do is use these for a while and then report the rest of this year, report against them with each quarter, and then when we get to 2016, we'll activate the actual incentives and assessments. So you'll have a chance to see, are these too easy, are they too hard, or are they the right place? So we're proposing 70% for the on-time performance goal. Because the technology that actually measures this isn't fully in place yet, we don't know what the current performance is. But we'll begin to have a lot more information about that as we finish all the data issues and finish instrumenting all the fleet with the new technology. We're also proposing that the goal for missed pullouts be 0, that we should never miss putting a bus in service on a timely basis. So you'll never have to give us an incentive for that. You can't get you can't get below 0. If we were to have a rash of failure so that we couldn't pull out buses on time each morning and afternoon, then you could assess us a penalty. And as an accidents per 100,000 miles, we're proposing 1.2, which is about what we're performing at right now. On the paratransit side, I'm sorry, go ahead.
On the missed pullouts, is there some kind of arrangement when it's due to weather, or when it's due, what do you consider missing pullouts because of weather? Is that included in it, or?
Yes, yes, it would be, yeah. There should never be a good reason to miss getting the bus out the gate. It might get late later on in the day because of bad weather. But
unless it's federally mandated that nobody rides, or the government.
Right. Well, that's good. I understand what you're saying. Yeah. So if the governor shuts the roads down, then that I wouldn't count that. But if we don't have a bus and a driver ready to go tomorrow morning at the time that it's supposed to go out, then we get dinged for that.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions on the fixed route ones? The paratransit ones, there are 5 prescribed in the contract, calls answered, on-time performance, as you see on the screen here. So we're proposing 90% calls answered ratio. We're getting close to that right now. On-time performance of 75%. Also 0 missed pullouts. We should never fail to get a bus out the gate at the time it's scheduled. Again, 1.2 accidents per 100,000 miles. And productivity, which is passengers per hour, of 1.3. So again, we're not asking you to act on these or accept these formally today. We will ask you to do that at the end of the year. We'll report against these or other ones if you'd like to change some of these values. We'll report against those the rest of this year, and then for next year we can activate them for purposes of assessments and incentives, after you're comfortable that they reflect a reasonable goal that's attainable, but also not too easy for us. So any questions on the cable ride benchmarks?
You know, in the call answered ratio.
In the what ratio?
The calls answered ratio.
Go ahead.
The 10% who did not get through. Now, some of these calls are obviously, the phone rings twice and they hang up too.
Right. Yeah, exactly, and probably wait a little while and call back. There's a very uneven demand in the call center, so there are times when there are lots of callers backed up, and the regular customers know that I might as well hang up now and call back in 20 minutes and I'll get through. So,
do we keep track of the average ring time?
The ring time? I'm going to ask for some help on that, Jack.
We do. Average call, how often it rings and before we pick it up. But we do have a standard that we tend to pick up within 3 rings. I believe it is, isn't there?
Yes, and there's also an abandon ratio of time. So the average caller abandons after 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So we do get that ratio as well.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
Daryl Simpson.
Daryl what?
Simpson.
Okay, and you are Jack?
Jack Kazouz, Khzouz.
Thank you.
If we're finished with that, we'll move on to the budget.
Yes.
Ordinarily, we're not really beginning into the budget process this early in the year, but I believe there are some significant issues facing us that we ought to begin. I don't want to surprise you later on in the year. For those of you who haven't been through a full budget cycle, here are some of the key dates. Our fiscal year starts January 1st, But we don't bring you a budget recommendation until mid-February, and by contract, you don't need to act on that until the end of March. So the first quarter is gone by the time we actually have an approved budget. And the reason for that is, as you veterans know, the biggest part of our budget on the revenue side, remember the revenue pie chart, half of it's state aid. And state aid is not known until the state legislature passes a budget at the end of March. So this is just a peculiarity, but there's not much we can do about that. That's when our fiscal year is, and that's when the single most important bit of information, which is the state program, becomes known to us. So that produces some, if everything were completely predictable, that wouldn't be much of a challenge, but I don't know that that's the case that we're going into this year. Here's what I want to warn you about. Based on what we know today, and some early forecasts, and these things will change, but based on what we know today, the current level of service, the service that we're operating right now, 12 months of that in 2016 will cost $131 million. The revenues that we are confident about today, including the current level of state assistance, only amount to $123.5 million. So that's a $7.5 million gap. Now, every year at this time, we face a gap, but this is larger than we ever have before. I want to make one point that's important here. That big $7.5 million gap isn't cost growth mostly. It's mostly on the revenue side. We have two major factors that will make our costs go next year. One is there's a wage increase April 1st in our labor contract, and the other one is it's a 4%. The second one is there is a 6% increase in our health care premiums for next year. You remember this is a very labor-intensive business. 75% of our costs are personnel costs. So you raise wages and you raise the cost of benefits, it has even small increases have a big impact on our budget. So a little less than half of that that 7.5 million is because of cost growth. It's about a 3% growth in our cost. The other thing that I'm sure you probably remember is that when we balanced the budget at the beginning of this year, just last March, we were facing the same kind of an issue, and then at the last minute, the legislature provided a $3.8 million capital one-time gift to Nassau County, and to the other counties also. That was the source of that money was a distribution of proceeds from the state's settlement with Wall Street. So it's not a recurring source of funds, and there is no reason today to assume that we'll be there in the next fiscal year. So that 3.8, that's the problem with using a one-time source to balance your budget, is that the next year it's not there. So more of that $7.5 million shortfall is because of revenue, not because of growth in expenses. So this is the best information that we have today, and there will probably be some changes, there'll be some new information, but the big information is the state operating assistance, and we won't know that till the end of March. You also remember seeing this, if you've been around for a few budget cycles, that per contract, we are obligated to adjust the number of hours of service to whatever revenues are available to Nassau County. We don't have an alternative but to adjust the number of hours after we've done everything else we can do to balance the budget. So the tools we have to balance the budget, you know them well. You can increase the fares, you can get an increase in STOA, or you can hope for an increase in that state operating assistance from Albany. The county can add some more money from its general fund. And if those things aren't sufficient, then we can go into the cost reduction side. Reductions in our administrative costs first. And when we make a budget presentation to you in February, we'll have some of those, and we'll show you that we've combed through our admin costs as much as possible. And if all of that's not enough to close the $7.5 million gap, then service levels have to be adjusted. I think based on the facts that I just described, that's not an unlikely scenario for 2016. Look at what happened to STOA the last few years. In 2013, we got a $6 million or $5 million increase, which was about 9%. In 2014, it went down to 2%, and last year we got no increase at all. Remember, we talked about this, this year. We talked about this during the budget, that the upstate systems got increases, the MTA got an increase, the downstate systems, Westchester, Suffolk, and Nassau, got no new money. STOA is based on a political process. There's no formula. It's somewhat unpredictable. It's whatever they do in Albany in committees and then in the legislature. So looking at this, I would say there's no reason to believe that our financial issues will be solved entirely by the state. That would be a $7.5 million increase would be beyond anything that we've seen before. And by the way, this may be a coincidence, but back in 2013 when we got those very nice increases, the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee was from Nassau County. The chair of, maybe a coincidence, but the chair of the Transportation Committee now is from Rochester. Upstate systems did better last year, and we got nothing. So I'm saying that just to explain our thinking, at least, that it would be pretty optimistic to think that others will solve this problem entirely for us. So the two early, again, I'm not asking for any action today, but two early steps that I would like to have considered are to catch up the cash fare to the Go Mobile fare. I'm sorry, catch up the cash fare and the Go Mobile fare to the MetroCard fare. You recall earlier this year you decided to hold the Go Mobile fare, the smartphone fare payment, and the cash fare at $250, but to follow the MTA up to $275 on the MetroCard. And remember, the logic for that is that if we don't follow them on the MetroCard, that it becomes a windfall for the MTA, and our customers don't necessarily save any money. So we think now it might be time to consider bringing the cash fare up to the same thing that MTA customers are paying today, $275. And secondly, for the first time, and this is the one that's I'm least happy about having to talk about, is to reduce or eliminate service on some selected lines based on ridership and on the amount of subsidy those lines take. We've got some ideas about this. Together, if we were to do both of those things effective January 1st, that would be a $4.1 million bite out of that $7.5 million deficit. It wouldn't solve it entirely, but it would get the remaining stretch down to $3 million, which is a little more comfortable. And if we had to solve it later on in the year with further service reductions, it wouldn't be as difficult to do. Why January 1? Why not wait until we find out what the legislature is going to do? If we wait till March, the end of March, which is when we'll know, then and then we make decisions, those decisions like fare increases or service reductions cannot be implemented immediately. There are some steps that we have to go through, and so they wouldn't be effective till the middle of the year. So instead of getting 12 months benefit on both the revenue and the expense side, we get 6 months benefit, let's say. So therefore, the actions would have to be that much more drastic in order to balance the budget, which we're required to do. So that's the reason we would like to have you begin to think about these things. Both of them would require Title VI analysis, and both of them would trigger the public participation process. So if we are to do these, then we'll need to talk about a public participation process in November of this year. Between now and then, we'll develop a lot more information, if we decide to go that way, about what kind of service reductions we might use. But here's an example. These are meant as an example. These are the routes that we would go after based on the amount of subsidy they require and the amount of ridership that they currently carry. These are selected entirely by the numbers, not by any attempt to balance it geographically or anything like that. But a lot of these very small routes have, over the years, we've tried to economize on them because they have very low ridership. They're down to one bus part of the day, 5 days a week, they can't be reduced further. They're to the point where they ought to be considered for elimination. I'll give you one example as to how that goes. So here's a comparison of the N6, a very large route, and the N14, a very small route. The N6 has an average of 46 passengers per trip. That's an average. There are 39 to 43 seats on a bus. So that means, on average, there are people standing on the N6. It also means anybody who uses the N6 knows that during peak hours, there are not a few standees, it's jam-packed. We actually pass up passengers at bus stops along the N6 route because we cannot get another person on the bus safely. Can't get another person on the bus, period, for that matter. So that's one end of the spectrum. And if we had unlimited resources, we'd be putting more and more service on the N6. And there are several other routes like that. The N14 is the other end of the spectrum. It carries an average of 5 people per trip, which means, that's an average, which means some of the time there's nobody on the N14. It provides a very nice service to Mercy Medical Center from Rockville Center and Hempstead railroad stations. And it's probably very valuable to a few people, but it's a very small number of people. So what that means then, if you look at the second line, is that the tax dollars that we were talking about earlier, riders on the N6 are getting 29 cents support from the taxpayers for each passenger trip. Riders on the N14 are getting $5.50, $5.52 support from the taxpayers. Very different kind of subsidy. Again, it's very valuable to the people who do ride the N14, but it's also incredibly expensive. And if we're in a situation where we have to begin to prioritize, this is one way to approach it. The N6 carries 16.5, 1/6 of all of our riders. The N14 carries 1/10% of our ridership. The riders on the N6 cover 85% of the cost of their service. The riders on the N14 cover 23%. So these are pretty stark differences. And again, all the service is valuable, but if we have to make priority decisions, we would suggest that this kind of approach is a logical way to do it. And if we develop a package to bring to you in November, that would be the basis on which our recommendation would be created. Let me stop there. That's the end of the budget outlook. I realize it's pretty grim, but I also think it's important not to surprise you with that next spring. Are there questions or comments that we could
I
respond
do
to?
have a question. I know that the two options that you propose total $4.1 million. Do you have any numbers on those options separate and apart from one another? The breakdown of them?
Oh, yes, yeah, we do. Elena, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. The fare increase represents about 1.2 million of the 4.1.
I'm sorry.
The fare increase is 1.2.
Sure. The fare increase is $1.2 million of the $4.1 million.
The most significant portion of that number is based on the reduction of service.
Yeah, certainly it's not a place that any of us want to go where we're raising fares and reducing service at the same time. And also, all those numbers are based on 12 months implementation. Mr. Chairman.
I think 2 years ago, we received NICE received a $800,000 grant from the Fed. Am I right on that?
I don't.
We had a federal grant.
We receive every year, part of our operating budget is made up of $7 million of federal funds. It's not a separate grant that we've been getting every year, but we have federal funding 5307.
No, this was a grant.
They are grants, but they're not something that, we've been using them on a continuing basis for operations, so we get a set pool of money from the FTA, and we can allocate a certain portion to operations. The rest of it is used for capital purchases, like purchasing vehicles, but we have the option of allocating a portion of that to operations, and we have done that in all the years that we've been.
Is that what we did that time? We allocated $800,000 to the operating budget from a federal grant, or was it something that was exclusively given? to nice. The number in my recall is,
I'm sorry, the number doesn't ring a bell.
does it ring a bell with anyone on the committee?
I'm drawing a blank, I'm sorry.
I have to go back to my notes.
So as we're developing the budget recommendation, obviously, we'll look for every source that we can, and we'll look for using federal, in fact, that's part of the way we balance the budget for this year. Using as many federal dollars as we can for operations, but there's a downside to that, and if we use them for operations, then they're not available for capital. And
How much did we get from the federal government? How much did you get from the federal government last year?
all told, capital and ops.
Yeah.
Sharon, can you give that number?
I'm sorry, about what?
16 million.
And what's your name?
Sharon-Saud, P-E-R-S-A-U-D.
Thank you.
So one of our longer range challenges, we go over the 5-year capital plan during the budget process, is that we don't have enough money to continue to replace the fleet in a timely way. So it's a trade-off. If you use it for operations to balance the budget, then the fleet's going to get older and other capital investments don't get made or don't get made as quickly. Okay, I got the rest of this is happier news. Now, the delivery will be completed by year end. These new buses will allow us to park 52 of the oldest, most expensive, least reliable, least comfortable buses. So it has some very positive impacts on our budget, in that they're going to be less expensive to maintain, and they'll be under warranty, and it will also have some very positive effects on the quality of the service. So we can't get them soon enough. These are pictures of the early stages of manufacture in the plant in Anniston, Alabama, as well as an artist rendering what it will look like when it's done. We also have a solicitation out on the street right now for 34 paratransit vehicles in 2 different sizes that will replace those very large international and very uncomfortable international vehicles that we currently use. Here's a picture of bus 1885, and I put this in here because I was hoping it would actually be here today. Unfortunately, it's not going to be here until next week. It will go into service mid-October, and almost all of them should be in service by the end of the year. Delivery is expected to be completed by mid-December, so virtually all of them will be in service before this year, and then we can park the 52 oldest ones.
Are they all equipped with the radar, I forgot the term.
With the GPS?
GPS and the announcements and all that
Yes.
stuff?
These will happen. We're installing them in most of the fleet right now, but these will come factory equipped with those things. They'll also come factory equipped with a partial shield for the drivers. We talked about that, and I think you're aware that the MTA's begun to install those because of the occasional assaults on drivers. It's a plexiglass divide that still allows the driver to talk to the customers and watch the fare box and that kind of thing, but interferes with somebody who's trying to assault the operator. We've worked through the selection of that with the union and at their behest. Eventually, all of the fleet will have them retrofitted also, but we're doing it over the course of time. The new ones will come in with it already installed.
Has that situation changed? I didn't see it mentioned in your assaults.
Well, knock on wood, if this is wood, it's so far this year has not been as frequent as last year. But they're very random. They happen in no predictable pattern. But yeah, so I think we've had a couple of minor ones, no serious injury ones like that. But this will also provide, I think, a sense of security for operators. So 1885 will be here pretty soon, and that's the first one. These pictures are in the plant in Alabama and Anniston. The one on the right that's how it will look with all the head signs now operating, and the decals are attached, so that's what you'll see. This is the first new flyer bus that we have in the fleet. The current fleet are all Orion buses, which was a Daimler-Benz product, but Daimler-Benz withdrew from the bus market. So we are the proud owners of the very last Orion 7 that we're producing. Well, I also want to bring you up to date on the technology project, and we'll finish up with this. We've been talking about this regularly for about a year. So it's coming along very well. The hardware install is nearing completion now. for those of you who haven't been with us throughout the whole thing, it's a GPS-based set of technologies that allows us to do a lot of different things. It gives us automatic vehicle communication, which means that we can see in the command center right next door, and we'll provide a tour there in just a moment. We can see where every bus is as well as where it ought to be, and we can manage things, we can see things happening, and we can manage actively rather than waiting for a call that says something is wrong. It allows us to do we think it will allow us to provide a much more on-time, much more reliable service and be especially valuable during a blizzard or some kind of special event. Computer-aided dispatching is the part that where the software is keeping track of where the bus ought to be, and so is alerting us to when we have an issue out there. It also helps in case of an emergency. If a driver triggers an alarm, we know exactly which bus it is and exactly where it is right now, whereas previously we had to rely on where the schedule said it ought to be. It also provides for customers real-time, or you'll see a demo of that in just a minute, real-time information for customers so that you'll be able with your smartphone to see where your bus is in a very user-friendly way, and Jack's going to demonstrate that in a minute. Plus it will also drive signs at the Hempstead Transit Center that give you real-time information, tell you your bus is 5 minutes away. This will be a big improvement, I think, for customers. Someday we won't even need printed timetables, not soon, but someday this is the way everybody will get their information. So we're really pleased to add this. In the picture here, one of our service quality managers has a mini command center on a tablet in front of him, so he can look if he's at Jamaica, for instance. He can look and see where the bus that he's waiting for is. He can tell customers where it is. He can look for a bus to use if there's a problem and a breakdown and he needs to find another bus to use. He can look for something that's just about to finish its work. It allows our SQMs to have real-time information too, no matter where they are. I think they've adapted to that very well already. It also provides automatic monitoring of vehicle conditions. So from the maintenance point of view, the bus can begin to tell us here automatically if temperatures or pressures are outside certain parameters. It allows our maintenance people to know that they've got a problem coming in before it comes in, or even to intervene if it gets beyond certain parameters. If engine temperature goes way too high before
Slow
that
down
engine,
just a little bit.
I get too
Just a
excited
bit.
about this.
I know.
Okay. If engine temperature, for instance, gets too high, we would know about it right now and could take steps to intervene before we damage an engine. It's also detailed data for planning and scheduling that will allow us to build better schedules going forward. And there's some accessibility features here. The annunciator inside the bus that tells people that what stop is coming up if they're vision impaired. There'll also be some features like that available at the Hempstead Transit Center. So I'm going to ask Mr. Kazuz to step up and show you a little bit of what you can now do as of last week with your smartphone. Jack?
So let's see if this transitions correctly. I'm going to unplug the display and plug it into my smartphone so I can give you a real sense of what it looks like. So we all know about the Go Mobile app, which we launched in June of last year. And I'll give everybody an update on where we are with that. There we go. So the Go Mobile app allows you to buy tickets and store tickets on your mobile phone. The dot at the top of the screen is our location. And so wherever my phone is, the dot will appear. So I don't have to do anything. I don't have to put in a route. I don't have to put in a time. I don't have to put in anything. It automatically finds my location and displays all the buses close to me. So anywhere you see the little antenna flash on the side of the bus, where on like the N24 where it says 13 minutes, that means that bus is live in the system. And the bus will arrive at my location, if I choose that bus, within 13 minutes. It displays all the buses around. Now, if it doesn't have the little antenna, it's because that bus isn't equipped yet with GPS, and it's showing schedule time. Okay. So as a customer, wherever I move, those buses will move with me. It will show me a map, and I can do things like pinpoint on that map the closest stop. So it could tell me if I want to walk to that stop and where the bus is in location to that stop. Let's go back and pick the 24. Okay, so it's showing me that next bus departs in 11 minutes from that location. Okay, so there's a lot of functionality to this. I can also tap on the N24 and get the most current service. So if that bus is out of service, for instance, if there's a detour, that'll be pushed to that notification. I can also go back and go to the map. Go to the map. Sorry. I can go to the map and actually trip plan for my map. So I can put my location where I am, my location where I want to go. I can also customize, as you can see, leave now. I can decide when I want to leave, and it'll guide me all the way through. This system's also multimodal. So as I travel, this system will travel with me. So again, you can see all the different, within our particular location, all the different options. As I travel into New York City, it's live. If I travel into Seattle, it's live. So I can use this tool anywhere I go. And it becomes kind of your one-stop shop for all your different trips. Now here I've got Long Island Railroad up. So this becomes a fantastic tool. I can also decide that this is my favorite route, and it will move this route to the top of the list every time and asks me how I do it. It will also show scheduled information. So if I want to look ahead. So as a predictive bus arrival time tool, it shows the next 3 buses. But if I want to look ahead and see what the scheduled time is in the afternoon, it's ideal for that. There's also a function here where I can set it to remind me that my bus is 5 minutes away. I better shut down my computer and start walking to the stop. So I don't have to wait in the rain anymore. I don't have to wait in the snow anymore. What it really does is makes travel more manageable for the user. And it allows the user to control their travel plans a lot more than what we currently have. Buses are going to be late, we know that. But at least now I don't have to be standing out there in the middle waiting for that. I can make my way to that bus ahead of time.
All right, I'm just going to be frank. The service this summer has been abysmal. At least once every week, I have been delayed by breakdowns. Long Island bus was never this bad. People are left stranded every day by buses that just never show up. Last week, I was left stranded at Roosevelt Field on a Sunday night when the N22 never showed up. And to add insult to injury, an N24 to Roosevelt Field pulled in and went out of service instead of helping us out. I had to walk 3 miles home in this sticky humidity. 3 miles home to Westbury from Roosevelt Field. NICE has been a colossal failure. There seems to be no maintenance. Buses come when they feel like it, and when there's breakdowns, replacement buses are rarely sent. I predicted this all along back in 2011 when Ed Mangano decided he didn't want to pay the MTA their reasonable offer to run the bus system.
Could you slow down just a little bit?
Okay, I'm trying to fit it into the 3 minutes.
I understand, but I can't understand.
Okay, I'll repeat. When Ed Mangano decided he didn't want to pay the MTA their reasonable offer to run the bus system. And what we have now is a perfect example of what happens when a bus system isn't properly funded. I know funding is outside of TransDev's control, but the allocation of the limited resources we have to work with is being done poorly. I have brought the 2011 MTA service allocation chart here, which I will give to you. NICE decided to leave almost all of the N80 and 81 trips intact. That might change now, though. But reduce the amount of N27 buses, which the MTA wasn't even going to touch. In 2011, there were 64 weekday trips on the N27, and it had half-hourly service almost all day. Now, there are only 50 trips. After 6 p.m., the N27 now runs only once an hour from Glen Cove. At Glen Cove, buses deadhead empty back to the depot instead of carrying passengers. so riders have to see empty buses pass by, while the bus that eventually comes will be more crowded. The N21 has just as many weekday runs as the N27, which is messed up, as ridership on the N21 only segment is very light, and I personally think that should be eliminated. You have been given suggestions for changes, but ignore them, even deleting rider complaints on Facebook, which I have a printout of too, which I'll hand to you. Transdev has failed to provide reliable and efficient service for its riders. The Long Island Railroad doesn't go everywhere, and towns like mine, which is Westbury, see many trains bypass their stations, and towns along the Babylon branch, which see better service, are too expensive for me to live in. So it is impossible for me to avoid riding nights completely. I sure wish I could. And last week, for the 5th time since you came back in 2012, my Easy Pay Metro card was damaged by one of your fare boxes, and now I have to wait 3 weeks for a new one to be sent to me. Never have I had so many read errors with Long Island Bus. You guys are a complete failure. It is really unfortunate that some folks would rather complain about the location of this meeting and are against raising the cash fare to $275 to bring in some much needed funding. Yeah, Long Island Bus riders, I'm looking at you. While riders keep getting stranded, Nassau, you have a responsibility to pay for quality bus service from the MTA. And if it weren't for corruption, I wouldn't even be sitting here with you reading this right now. And it's very hot outside, and the bus I took here had no air conditioning. The N35, bus 1661, no air conditioning. And there are a lot of buses like that. It's just despicable. And I'm just going to hand this to you. You can keep them. These are the this is the table from the MTA with the ridership numbers. And these are the comments that NICE feels like deleting from their Facebook page. They're complaints. There's nothing inappropriate about them, and yet they delete them. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry I couldn't have a better message for you. Take it easy.
Is not what you're recommending today.
That's correct. It's not a plan, it's an example of the kind of plan if we proceed in that direction.
I just thought that the bus routes were already analyzed before you put this presentation as to what the priority would be of the so-called elimination routes. I just noted the N21 is not there.
Well, that's right, and we have an idea of which routes are the most expensive to continue and the least productive in terms of ridership. But it needs more analysis than we've provided so far.
Okay, talking about, Mr. Setzer, talking about breakdown, how good are the drivers of doing pre-trip and post-trip of the buses?
Well, that's a very important part of what they do. We make it a priority for operators to do pre-trips.
And post-trip.
And post-trips. And to fill out the paperwork that goes with it. I would say it's less than 100%, but we've steadily pressed drivers to do that. We check it when we do blitzes, what we call safety blitzes. That's one of the things that we will check. So we've certainly made it a priority in the driver's mind, but there are 600 some operators, so on any given day, somebody probably didn't do what they were supposed to do. I think it's improved dramatically. And
that will also help in prevention.
That's correct, yes.
That would be good if they can step up on that a little bit.
Okay, absolutely, yes, I agree, thank you.
Excuse me, John, I would recommend that, did you give Mr. Setzer a copy of this?
He can keep you can give him a copy.
Well,
I'll give him okay.
Drivers, and I'm not defending it, but I'm thinking that possibly this is what's going on. Drivers have a schedule that they maintain, and they drive up to a certain point. Therefore, if they go to the end of that line and they come back not in service, it's because their tour has finished.
That's
or
right.
Their route has finished. And they wouldn't be able to do that because now you got tracking unless they are supposed to be coming back.
That's correct, yes.
So I would think that a lot, because it used to happen a lot too, through my experience. You'd be going, you finish your tour, you're coming back, and people are waving their arms like, oh, I just saw 3 out of service buses. But it's because I've been driving for 9 or 10 hours already and my tour finishes. So that's what I'm saying, and I'm seeing that they wouldn't be able to do that because of the tracking system that you have, unless they're mandated to come in, right?
That's correct. The system that we have, even though it's not 100% yet, will indicate when an operator is not where he's supposed to be according to the schedule. And you won't be, because you're experienced, you won't be surprised to hear that that's happened a time or two since we turned it on.
Okay, thank you.
I guess we'll continue with public comment.
Kuzo,
How do you spell that?
C-O-U-Z-Z-O.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is a microphone here.
Okay, hello, good
To
afternoon.
your left.
Okay. Good afternoon, council and bus company attendees. My name is Stephen Kuzo. I'm a founder of an advocacy group for the disabled called ADAM, which is Americans with Disabilities Awareness Movement. I live in Suffolk County. I have to thank Dicey and SCAT because I would not be here today without them. In the disabled community, Paratransit is our independence, to be able to go to the community, to be able to come to meetings, be able to go to work. We depend on it. And I'm blind, so I don't drive anymore. Another one came up about 3 years ago. We also work with the independent living organizations in our counties. In Suffolk County, it's Silo. In your county, it's Lysol. And Kelly Henry here's advocate for them, outreach person. And one thing I noticed when the CEO was speaking, that eliminating a bus route with only 5 riders, I can understand that, but what people don't really understand is that the paratransit routes follow that route, which means that if you're a disabled person that needs service, if you eliminate that route, then anybody that was in 3/4 of a mile of that route no longer has service. In Nassau County, there's over 25% of the disabled community has no service for paratransit due to an ADA minimum guideline or rule that 3/4 miles to a fixed bus route. So just keep in mind, if anything you do with a fixed bus route will affect the disabled community. I'm also on a committee in my township, Huntington. They have their own bus system called HEART. I'm on a Citizens Advisory Committee, and the director from that committee addressed the committee yesterday. They're going to give 2 weeks of free fixed route transit in Huntington. It's being paid by the local businesses, not the town, not the county. Target, Super Stop and Shop, and to increase ridership. In Huntington, they have both Suffolk County bus and HART bus running the same routes. So as allies, not adversaries, we'd like to join in a voice with the county, and we petitioned, I was speaking to my, as a constituent to my legislator, Roy Trotter this morning, some of the issues that we face and how we can work with them. At the last subcommittee in Suffolk County, there was over 50 of us that showed up to speak about transit and extending hours, not cutting hours, and how we're going to do this and how we can get this to be done. I think as a community, we all want the same thing, that anybody that's disabled that needs transit should have it. I think as a community, townships that are able to help out, like Huntington, Smithtown just started their own paratransit for the community a year ago. You have in North Hempstead Independence, Project Independence with the taxis for the seniors. We need to enlist everybody in the community, the towns, the businesses supporting it for all the same goal is that the disabled in the community has transit when they need it, because without it, they're captive. This came up in Nassau County at the, I was asked to be a speaker at the Helen Keller National Center for the Deafblind. I brought 2 people with me as guest speakers. A woman's a speaker for the Guide Dog Foundation, and a gentleman who's founded a ministry for the deaf. And we were left 1.5 miles from the where we were going, because that's as far as Dicey would go. Same thing in Suffolk County. We took a taxi, but the reality is the residents in that community, at that center, that come from all over the country, these are 18-year-olds plus, with dual problems of sight and hearing, who come to learn skills to be able to adapt to their communities and contribute, can't even get into town because there's no paratransit. I've reached out to Delia DeRiggy-Winton, and she made an article about it and brought it up because it's her part as a legislator. I've reached out to Jody Bosworth, trying to get the town to get involved. I haven't been successful, but I'm not beyond sitting in her office for a day to get an audience. But it's all of our communities. I spoke with the village of Sands Point, letting them know these residents have no transportation, and they had no transportation available. Probably the richest village in the United States. But this is what Adam does, is we're awareness. We're not a 501. We never ask for money. We don't ask for legislation. Bring a face-to-face encounter with the disabled community, to legislators, politicians, businessmen, trying to make the community better. We have great stories about selfless individuals who give of themselves in the community, do wonderful things to make the disabled community better. And like I said, we're planning to go to upstate to Albany, and we will, as a voice for the legislature and county legislatures, bring it to our senators. I met with Senator Flanagan, I'm his constituent, 3 weeks ago about a voting issue for the deafblind, but transportation is also one in the budgeting there. We need to have service for our disabled people and our regular people on fixed routes. And the funding needs to be there. It should be a community thing, and there is outreaches for that through the towns, through the businesses in the community, through the county and the state and the government. So we'd like to let you know we're allies, and then we thank the bus company, because like I said, my independence, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for what you guys have already done in providing service on the buses for the Paratransit. I've only become disabled and haven't been able to drive for the last 4 years. But in that time, I've been able to become active because of the services that are provided by Suffolk County and Nassau County. So we'd like to let you know that we'd like to work with you.
Thank you.
I guess you'd be an ally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lippman. Mr. Kuzo's description of the way paratransit works in Nassau County was right on, it was very accurate. In 2010, I think, the MTA, who had previously provided service from all over Nassau County, there was no service area eliminated, decided for budgetary reasons to pull back to the ADA requirement, which is anywhere within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route bus stop at the times when fixed route service is provided. ADA service is meant to simulate, in a way, fixed route service. That's the, when we came in 2012, that's the service profile that we inherited. But it does mean that there are significant parts of Nassau County that do not have paratransit service available. So somebody who wants to begin or end a trip in one of those places has to find some alternative to Able Ride. So we've had some discussions with the same legislators Mr. Kuzo was talking about. And we said it's not impossible to do, it's a matter of resources. It's several $1 million, I think. Nobody really knows because we don't know what unmet needs are out there today. But that's the issue. Can we afford to do it? We're more than interested, and we said this to the legislators, we're more than interested in working on alternatives, either to find money or to provide service some other way. There may be less expensive ways to do it. I won't go into all that now, but there could be some supplements to the ADA. ADA service is very expensive because it's on demand, it's 24/7, it's 24-hour advance reservation. We must respond to that. So it's a fairly expensive kind of service and requires the maintenance of a pretty significant infrastructure in order to do it. There could be some less expensive ways to provide another level of service, and we're more than happy to get into those discussions.
Thank you.